If you ever wondered what passive-aggressive looks like in fluorescent lamination, imagine a man who taped a sign to a pool gate with the solemnity of someone sealing a crime scene and then multiplied that energy by 100 because he was mad about a single letter in a binder. I still think about that sign, Comic Sans, laminated to within an inch of its life, taped so many times it looked like a small boat, and I smile because that little sheet of paper is where everything started to unravel. That sign was Gary Hutchkins declaring himself sovereign, and I was about to show him how thin that crown really was. Let me give you the picture because context matters. I moved into Sycamore Ridge 2 years before any of this, and honestly, I liked it. HOA community, reasonable dues, a usable clubhouse, a tennis court that never saw a soul, and my favorite, a tidy community pool. For a guy who works from home and lives alone, that pool was my summer social life. I read my HOA docs before I bought the usual skim, signed the papers, paid my dues, did my lawn at regulation height. By every metric, I was the model resident. Then Gary became board president. Gary had been treasurer before, low-profile numbers guy, but the moment he got a gavel, something changed. He suddenly had the vibe of someone who'd spent 3 decades following rules and now wanted to write them instead. Polo shirts tucked into khaki shorts every day, driving a beige Camry, very serious about chair cushions. He started a new check-in process for the pool. Still scan your fob, but also sign a paper log, name, unit, time, and number of guests' signature. The binder lived in a little weatherproof box by the gate. Gary laminated instructions and stapled them like they were scripture. I thought it was annoying. Fine. I signed the log every time. I used the pool in the mornings before the crowd arrived. I kept my head down. Then one hot Saturday in late June, 14 months into Gary's reign, my friend Darius came by. Darius doesn't live in Sycamore Ridge. He's a neighbor from outside, a friend of 8 years. Our HOA rules said residents could bring up to 3 guests as long as the resident stayed with them. No pre-registration, no fee, just note the guest in the log. I'd written D. Williams in the guest column when I signed in because I knew he was coming. Around 1, Gary materialized at the gate, not in swim trunks, but in his uniform of authority, polo and khakis, binder in hand. He walked up like a man about to audit a grocery list. Looked at the log, looked at Darius, looked back at the log and said very earnestly, "The log entry says D. Williams. I need the full legal name for guest registration." Darius gave that face people get when airplane audio is slightly out of sync, not mad, just bewildered. I told Gary to write Darius next to the D. He said I couldn't amend the log without compromising integrity. He wrote something, stuck the pen in the binder like a victory flag, and left. 2 weeks later, without a single prior written notice, no certified letter, no email, no board meeting, a laminated sign appeared on the pool gate. Pool access revoked, Unit 14B. I stood there, took a picture, and then went home to reread the HOA governing documents like someone rereading terms of service while planning an appeal. Section 7.4 and the state planned community statute were very clear. You can't suspend a homeowner's access to common amenities without written notice, an opportunity to be heard, and a formal board vote at a noticed meeting. The statute even required 14 days written notice and a chance to request a hearing within 10 days. None of that had happened. I called my neighbor Deb, quick coffee by the mailbox neighbor, sharp, hates Gary for reasons that predate me, and she said, "Keep me posted." I sent a certified letter to the board, emailed the management company, demanded copies of any notices, and meeting minutes, formally requested a hearing, cited the statute. My fob still didn't work. The management company replied polite non-committal. Gary's signature showed up on the certified mail return receipt. 10 business days passed. Nothing. Gary eventually mailed a normal letter, not certified, that read like someone trying to sound lawyerly. It accused me of providing incomplete and potentially fraudulent guest information, underlined fraudulent, and offered an informal discussion with Gary himself, the person who'd initiated the suspension. I went back to the CC&Rs and the state statute and found the definition of a hearing, a quorum of the full board, 5 people with a reasonable chance for the member to present a case. An informal chat with Gary across a kitchen table was not a hearing. Also, there was an addendum. Gary cited a pool conduct code he'd apparently drafted that I'd never received and no one else I asked had received. Under our law, new binding rules require notice and proper adoption. That pool code looked like it had been born on Gary's laminator and stapled into life. I'm not a lawyer, I'm a project manager, which meant I know how processes are supposed to work. What I was seeing was a simple process, failure dressed up as discipline. Gary had decided to punish me for perceived disrespect, and he cut corners because he could. I built a file. I pulled recorded plats at the county recorder to understand common area boundaries. I paid for an hour consultation with a real estate attorney, Patricia, who calmly confirmed my reading the suspension was procedurally defective and likely void. The statute even said a non-compliant suspension was unenforceable and could expose the board to liability for actual damages. Here's the twist, the part that changed everything. While I was digging through the recorded plat for context, something nagged at me. The plat showed a 20-foot drainage and utility easement running across the front of Gary's lot, the very strip of grass between his property line and his front walkway. The recorded easement language reserved that strip to the Association for Drainage Utility Maintenance and General Community Access. I measured it. The easement covered pretty much his whole front lawn. In short, I had a legal right to be in that 20-foot front strip for community member activities. It occurred to me maybe, just maybe, Gary had forgotten that the community had certain rights on that land. I called Deb. "Okay, tell me I'm insane," I said. I told her I wanted to host a pool party, not at the pool, but on Gary's front easement. I'd rent a roll-off dumpster, line it with heavy tarps, fill it with water, invite neighbors, play steel drum music, and be legally within my rights. Deb laughed until she stopped, then said, "If you're going to do it with style." I called Patricia. She had professional amusement, then practical counsel. Don't damage the property. Keep activities within the easement document, and give notice. She warned it would be provocative. That was the point. I prepared meticulously. Rented a 10-yard dumpster for the weekend. Bought heavy tarps and binder clips. Organized water runs with Marcus from down the street, who loved the plan. Inflatable flamingos, chairs, sunscreen, steel drum playlist. I copied the easement document, highlighted the language, sent a certified notice to the board 5 days before the event, and personally left a polite formal note in Gary's mailbox saying I'll be using the recorded easement on Saturday for a community social event, just a courtesy heads up. The dumpster arrived. Friday dropped neatly within the easement boundaries I'd marked in landscape paint. Gary came out, went through phases. Confusion, dawning comprehension, fury, then slammed his door. We lined the dumpster. Saturday morning filled it enough for people to sit and splash, set up a speaker and waited. Around noon, neighbors arrived, Deb in a hat and cooler, Marcus with his half-inflated flamingos, Dave and Priya with watermelon Walt, an original HOA board member in 70 swim trunks carrying a croquet set. 11 people, steel drum music, a dumpster pool sitting in the easement, and it was frankly a joyful scene. Gary came outside 3 times. Once to stare. Once to call the city no citation. Once when a police cruiser actually pulled up. I had anticipated that and had the easement document on the table. The officers read it, shrugged, asked us to keep the noise reasonable, and left. Gary was pacing his front step on hold for 15 minutes with someone about HOA legal matters. Linda, his wife, came out and then retreated with decisive regret. At 5:50, we drained the dumpster into the easement drainage line, cleaned up, left no damage. It was peaceful, pointed, and public. The aftermath was predictably legal. Gary's attorney sent a certified demand accusing me of trespass, nuisance, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Patricia replied asking them to substantiate the claims in light of the recorded easement and the police having concluded no disturbance. They dropped trespass and softened the rest. I filed a complaint with the board about Gary's handwritten note under my door calling me a troublemaker, conduct unbecoming of a board officer. Weeks of letters and posturing passed. Gary quietly withdrew his threats. No apology, no gallant resignation. The pool conduct code vanished from the posted rules 2 months later. My access was restored in writing. The pool is great. Gary is still president. We pass each other on the street with a stiff nod from him and a pleasant wave from me. What I learned, and this is the part that matters, is that authority without restraint is brittle. Gary thought laminating a sign and underlining fraudulent were powers. Real power is knowing the material facts, reading the recorded plat, understanding easements, knowing when procedure matters. If he'd just written Darius in the log, none of this happens. But he needed to win. He needed to win so badly, he turned a minor administrative gripe into a whole summer narrative that ended with me renting a dumpster, inviting neighbors, and playing steel drum music on his front lawn. There's a lesson in that when someone feels insecure in the power they have, they'll brandish it to hide the insecurity. And sometimes all it takes to deflate that posture is a little knowledge, a little civility, and a perfectly legal bit of theatricality. The sign on the gate is gone. The app Gary installed now autofills guest names. He wanted digital timestamps, not handwritten pages. That system works fine. But the memory of a Saturday afternoon with neighbors splashing in a dumpster in full view of a man who thought he could suspend rights on a whim, that memory is its own kind of justice. So I'll end the way I started, with the image of that laminated sign, ridiculous, hyperbolic, and totally earnest, and with a question for you. When someone in a small community decides unilateral power over shared things, what's the right response? Quiet compliance until the next sign shows up, or that sort of theatrical pushback that forces a recheck of the rules? Tell me which side you fall on. And if you've ever taken a strange, legal but provocative step to call out misuse of authority, share that story. I want to hear it.